Okay. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Uh, I am Alan Bergano. I am the Hampton Roads, Virginia chapter that running this thing called FANHS now. And we welcome you to our pre, I guess your pre-informational Zoom event where we're going to honor on Wednesday, the Department of Labor will be honoring Larry Itliong, Vera, Cruz, and Pete Velasco. So tonight we're going to have some speaks some speakers. We're going to share some of our thoughts as far as what does this induction mean to them. But before we begin, I'd like to start off with a moment of silence. Let's close our eyes, bow our heads, and think of those who could not be with us tonight, especially those that left the Philippines, who came to America to put a roof over our heads, food in our stomachs, and provide us opportunities that were denied to them. Thank you. Okay, what I'm going to do is a real quick, what would you call this?
It's a PowerPoint. What else
Okay,
you would call it?
all right.
It's the official invitation.
Okay, okay. You guys have to what do you call it? Not coach me, just tell me what you see, because if I'm messing up, I'll mess up. What do you see now?
Bullet points.
Okay, is there definitions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do some definitions so that at least you'll understand. We all get kind of confused as far as what exactly is a Filipino, a Pinoy, a Filipino American, da 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 da. So I'm gonna define what a Filipino is, and it's a person of Filipino ancestry living in the Philippines. A Pinoy is a person of Filipino ancestry living in the United States. And although we are made from the same stock, Filipino, we live in completely different environments. So therefore, we are different. So the Filipino identity implies the Philippines. The Pinoy identity implies the United States. Okay, I'm gonna take you on a journey to define what's a Manong and what's a Manang. Uh, very quickly, in 1898, Philippines becomes a colony of the United States. And one of the first things that the Americans decided to do was instill the value of an educational system, the American educational system into the Philippines. And so starting in approximately 1901, there were 600 Thomasites which were teachers from America. They landed to start implementing this system. And it took about, let's say about another 10 years where uh, the public education was reached throughout the Philippines. And so when you start doing the math and you add 11, so around the early 1920s to 1930s is that first generation of Filipino students who completely went through the educational system. And what they were brainwashed to do was that they were thinking, okay, in order for us to better ourselves, we have to come to America to get a college degree, then come back because a college degree, an American college degree, is will be worth a lot of money. And so with that kind of backdrop, we will continue here. And 1906, the second immigration wave, according to FANHS, started with 16 cicadas in Hawaii. Now, these were specifically laborers, so they weren't there to go to they weren't there to go to school, but they were there to work. In the 1920, there was 5,229 Filipinos in the mainland, 21,000 in Hawaii, so approximately 26,000. But you can see from 1920 to 1930 that jumped. all the way to 45,000, 60,000 in Hawaii, and a total of 105,000. So that jump on the mainland was because of that desire to come to America to get an education. And when you start describing that type of population, 90% they were very young. 90% was ages 15 to 30, and the ratio was 14 to 1, male, female. There were women though, okay, and they were just very far and few, but there were ladies, and you can imagine the pickings they get to have, but they were highly, highly valued and treasured. Um, when they came to America, there were nobody here was to greet them, and so they found out that in order to get a college education, it's going to take money, and so they had to find jobs or work, and what they knew was basically farm work because they were basically from the provinces. Very, very, very hard work. They were working in the fields in California. Um, yeah, just very, very difficult conditions, low wages, horrific working conditions, living, and so forth and so on. But they were handsome young men. This is a crew in Alaska, and you could just look at their faces. You could see the attitude on them, you know, very, very young, energetic, full of promise, full of hope. And they were handsome, well dressed when they weren't working. This is how they look like in their street clothes. Handsome men, very, very stylish. And they had that swag, something about them, they just floated on air when they're when they're into the city. And not only did they work in the fields and in Alaska, they also had restaurants. They worked in hotels. They were dishwashers, but there was also small businesses. But if you look at this picture, look at the dude with the hat. Now that's a freaking Manong, man. He's got that style, he's got that flair. When you look at the signage in the back, we serve breakfast, lunch, and dinners. Okay. Then you see Culding there on the lower right. So when you start reviewing, okay, 1920s, 1930, approximately 45,000 Pinoys, that's what they call themselves, were on the mainland, hardworking, young men, dashing, had a lot of style, a lot of promise. They were educated in the sense that they had at least a high school degree and they could speak English. So you think that, they survived pretty well in America, but what happened? This is what they were saying. 1930, Mr. D.W. Rohrabaugh was a Monterey County Justice of the Peace, denounced Filipinos as, and I quote, the most worthless, shiftless, diseased semi-barbarians that ever came to our shores. He charged the Pinoys with being disease carriers, destroying the American wage scale, and attempting to allure young American and Mexican girls. This judge asserted that, and I quote, Filipinos migrating from a very primitive society were able to live 15 in one room to sustain themselves on only rice and fish. In short, they corroded American standards of labor and morality, end quote. This is what Carlos Bolasan, one of the famous Pinoy writers, described the plight of the Manong generation in these words, and I quote, I came to know that in many ways it was a crime to be a Filipino. I feel like a criminal running away from a crime I did not commit. But the crime is that I am a Filipino in America. Then you had signs like this posted up all up and down on the West Coast in hotels that says positively no Filipinos allowed. So you had a lot of blatant racism. They couldn't live in certain parts of the city. They could not own land, could not own a home. They were denied American citizenship. Just really, really obscene obstacles. On top of that, these are some of the other things that confronted them. You had the Great Depression of 1929. Then in 1934, Tidings-McDuffie Act. What that did was it decreased the number of Filipinos allowed to come to America to only 50 a year. So prior to that, all you had to do was pay money on the ship to come to America, and you didn't have no passports because they were American nationals. But the Patadens-McDuffie Act tried to, decrease the influx of these Pinoys. Then in 1935, they passed the Repatriation Act, which paid money to Pinoys to go back to the Philippines. So out of the 45,000 that were here in America, approximately 7,000 took advantage of this, but the rest stayed. And those that stayed, they had to figure out, how are we going to survive? And so what happened, they started to form this really, really tight-knit brotherhood. They started to share stuff. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. They become very, very generous towards each other. You watch my back, I watch yours. Now, probably every one of these guys owned that car. That's what we're talking about sharing. Filipino American labor activism for better wages, working conditions, and better housing. One of the first strikes came in 1924 in September. 1,600 went on strike on the Honeypepe camp in Kauai, Hawaii, where 16 sugarcane cutters were killed. That's 100 years ago. So when you talk about strikes, labor unions, there's a long history of at least 100 years that these Manongs, these Pinoys, were getting together and just say, hey, we need to survive, we need to get better wages, so forth and so on. 1933, you had cannery workers in the Farm Laborers Union that served those that are going to Alaska. In August 1934, you had the lettuce strike in Salinas, California. 1935, Pinoys of the Yakima Valley, even though it was against the law to own land, what they did was they leased land, hundreds of acres on the Yakima Indian Reservation. 1939, April, 6,000 Pinoy asparagus cutters were on strike in the San Joaquin Delta, California. 1945, September, Hawaii, again, another sugar strike. And Eddie Lapa was in charge, and that's Edwina's uncle. And as a result of that strike, the menial laborers or the workers in Hawaii became the highest paid menial laborers in the world. And then up until 1965, that's when you had Larry Itliong, Phil Cruz, and Pete Velasco. They basically, learned from all these strikes. The Pinoys that went on strike during that time had experience as far as, what they had to go through. And so when you have those Manongs inducted, they represent all those Manongs that came in the 20s and 30s. And then World War II came. All of a sudden, they were no longer called little brown monkeys, but they became the Fighting Filipinos. Now, these guys, they served in World War II. The same country that despised them, that just hated them, but they gave up and set that aside and joined the U.S. Army, Navy, or they joined the World War II efforts, and they became the Fighting Filipinos. This is my favorite picture. Look at these guys. Despite all the humiliation, they were shot at, they were verbally abused, they overcame blatant racism, they formed this huge bond together. They loved each other, and they held their heads high. held their heads high. This is them in their their nice clothes. Now, I have to pay tribute to my father. Here's my father, 1928, in high school, Seattle, Washington. That's him there, standing next to in the back row, to the right of that tall white dude. But that's the Filipino club in high school. My father came at the age of 15, 16, and I know he wasn't folk dancing. So I don't know what these guys did as far as a club's concerned, but when he came, he became a houseboy. He worked his way in Alaska. He went to survived the Depression, then went to Oregon State University. He worked in the fraternities, cleaned, cared for and did the laundry, the dishes, and so forth and so on. But he graduated, put his way through college and graduated in a degree in pharmacy, 1936. But he could not practice pharmacy because it's against the law, because he could not become a citizen. But then World War II came. He became a chief dispenser officer in the Army in New Orleans, Louisiana. And so that's a Manong, my father. So he goes back to the Philippines in 1950 and meets my mom.
He's just talking about his daddy.
Huh? Pardon?
Keep
Somebody say
going.
something? Keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. And the age difference. My mom was like 25 years old and my dad was like 45. So these Manongs, after World War II, they married young women. But again, look at how he's dressed, but look how my mom is dressed. So these guys were very, very stylish. And they indulged in me three principles: commitment, courage, and conviction. With those three values, I was able to accomplish things that were just, unthinkable. Yesterday is my 41st anniversary as a practicing dentist in private practice in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I owe a lot of that to my mom and dad. So when you talk about Filipino American history, it starts at home. You got to know the struggles of your parents. Okay. And if it wasn't for these guys, if it wasn't for the Monongs in Alaska that nurtured me, I worked 10 summers in Alaska to know what it's like to work hard, to know what I represent and who I represent. And so this is my definition of the Manong generation. Those that came in 1920 to 1946, they were a product of the public American educational system in the Philippines. They were American pioneers, and I say they're Filipino Americans with an attitude: courage, conviction, commitment. And that's what that generation means to me. And I really celebrate Manong Larry, Manong Philip, and Manong Pete to be inducted into the Labor Hall of Honor. And they represent all those Manongs and Manangs that came in the 1920s and 30s. And I thank all of you guys to hear my story, to see my interpretation, to remind me, even though I live on the East Coast, that I am a product of the Manongs and Manangs. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I guess it's my turn. Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, this is Ben Minor. Alan asked me to help co-moderate tonight's Zoom, and I'm going to give you a heads up. We have with us one of the officials from the Department of Labor, Danny Pasquale. I'm going to have him speak on this upcoming Wednesday in the celebration of our three heroes. Then I would like to have Peter Baccia, who's one of our premier writers, who's written many stories about the Manongs and Manangs. And then someone that knew Pete, and I knew Larry and Philip, but I never got a chance to meet Manong Pete. And I'm going to have Emil de Guzman to share his experience with knowing and meeting with Manong Pete. And then, of course, one of our premier icons in Central Valley is the Germero family, represented by Luna. So I'm going to have Luna share her thoughts. But before I do, I'm a protocol officer in many communities. I would like to welcome our city councilwoman of South San Francisco, Flora Nicholas. And so, Councilwoman Flora, if you don't mind, just as everybody's going to keep their comments and remarks brief because we're going to have all of you share your thoughts and your experiences with this upcoming event that it's going to be both historic and iconic. So let me have one of our leading public officials of the Bay Area to share a common thought, and she's been always attending these Zoom meetings, and I noticed that, but I want her to be recognized that this year, the election of 2024, many Filipinos have gotten themselves elected. And in the state of California, we're going to have the first Filipino to sit at the Senate level, first time. And then, of course, we're going to have a Filipina from LA who's going to be the first Filipina at the state assembly. But Councilwoman Floor has done many good things, including recognizing Filipinos, as well as naming a community center named after our godmother of politics in California. That's Tita Alice Bullo. So, Councilwoman Floor, would you please give us a few remarks, and then we'll go.
Good evening, everyone. It's really, really important, I think, for us Filipinos, for us Filipino Americans, because I consider myself now truly ingrained, and I want to put a stake on the ground because this is where I'm raising my grandchildren and my children. It's really, really a proud moment for us to be for Larry Itliong and Mr. Vera Cruz and oh my goodness, I forgot.
Pete Velasco.
Yeah, to be inducted to the Hall of Honor, because this is truly a moment that we always wanted to be recognized and be seen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Floor. And now,
Ben,
yes.
you missed Dory Baker from Wapato, Yakima Valley. She's also going to say a few words.
Okay, please do. Dory?
Unmute.
Unmute yourself. Unmute.
I'm just going to make it briefly. I am from Yakima Valley, born and raised in the Bay Area, very familiar with the Salinas area. Did hear about the judge, but I didn't know his name. There has always been hardships along the Pacific Northwest or the Pacific coastline. And I think the writings of Carlos Bolason were very indicative of the times and the itinerant work that the initial Filipinos came, and they really traveled the rails and traveled the crops and went all the way from down in Imperial Valley, all the way Salinas and into the Bay Area, and then up through Oregon into Yakima Valley and the strawberry fields out in Bainbridge, and then up to Alaska. So they survived, but also too, along the way, they became a very strong brotherhood. And I know that the Filipino pioneer families here in Yakima Valley are very close to many that traveled the same route as they did. I did want to mention that the Yakima Nation did agree to lease land to the Filipino farmers. But the reason that was available is that the Yakima Nation Reservation is not U.S. property. It's Yakima Nation Reservation. So that legality made it possible, but it had to go through Washington, D.C. also. But the Manongs here went to Alaska. They worked hard, and I guess they were victims of raids, and people had to shelter them in their homes. Uncle Harry had to bail out people all the time. Uncle Harry books and Uncle Roy Baldos. So the turbulence for the Manongs were very difficult, and could have been discouraging, but they did have spirit and they did have commitment. The one thing I have to really honor that generation for is that they were never bitter. They never passed that bitterness down. They just spoiled all the kids that were in the camp, gave them money, and said, go to school. They didn't say, well, somebody took my car and somebody cheated me out of this or that. They were never bitter. They always just said, I will take the brunt. The Manong generation took the brunt and the prejudices and the shutting out and the lost opportunities and just absorbed that. And then the next generation, I had uncles that always gave us money and said, go to school. And I think I have to say that's a very commendable idealistic way that the Manongs passed on to other generations without passing on the bitterness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dory.
Thank you, Dory.
I saw the name Dolores Sibonga. Isn't she a former city council woman
First
of Seattle?
Pinay.
First Pinay. Dolores, are you here, Councilwoman Dolores? I saw you. No? There you are.
I am.
So
I'm here.
would you like to make some brief remarks because of your status as a former councilwoman and first
well,
Pinay of
thank
Seattle?
you very much. I grew up in Seattle's Chinatown because my parents ran a small cafe. I was an only child, so I grew up with adults. And of course, the Manongs. They were my uncles. And I credit them with giving me a strong sense of community. Their hopes and dreams became mine. And as a result, I went to school. I can still remember I was being initiated into some college group. And through the small windows in the kitchen, I saw Filipinos waving at me. But it was really community that brought me through my life as first a journalist, and then as a lawyer, and then as a member of the Seattle City Council. So I really credit them with giving me the motivation to continue my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and thank you for your service. I would like to ask Danny Pasquale, a staff of Department of Labor. I don't know if he's the undersecretary. I'll let him explain that. But I don't know Danny, but I know his family. If you know Mona Pasquale, our first Filipino who ever held a state office in the state of California. So we're honored to have a representative of the Pasquale family. Danny, would you please share a few thoughts of the genesis of this important event that's going to happen on Wednesday?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Danny Pasco, but before I start, hi, Auntie Luna. Hi, Auntie Dorothy.
Hi, Danny. Hi, Danny. Good to see you.
It's good to see all of you. I see some names here: Alan, Ben, Erwin, Emil. I spoke with Emil this afternoon. I'm just really happy and very proud to be part of this. And this is something, we can tell the story of how it all started, but we're here. It took a while to get here, but now it's amazing. The Great Hall in our national headquarters holds 300. And as of this morning, it was at 296. So people are traveling from all over the country to attend this historic event. If you can't make it, there's a live stream, and I can put the link into the chat. And please share it. Share it with everybody you can. Post it on social media. It will be recorded, but I'm hoping that you can take time to watch it. I am with the Department of Labor. This is my 25th year. I grew up in a small farm town in Walnut Grove, California, the Sacramento Delta. My mom still lives there. Mona, my sister, still lives there. I'm the fourth of five children, and so when Ben asked me today, Manong Ben asked, "Hey, do you know Mona?" I have to say that all the time. Yeah, she's my sister. Yeah, she's my sister. So, speaking of her, she was and still is a great example for my siblings. She was like a third parent, and we followed and we obeyed what she told us to do growing up, and we were always involved, and we're still involved, it seems like. But I do appreciate you giving me the time to talk, and I hope to meet you guys in person for those who are going to be there in DC this week.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. And
Hey,
thank yes, go
Ben.
ahead.
I just want to thank Daniel there because I just emailed this guy because I didn't know what kind of Filipinos taking charge of this whole thing. I was hoping, I was crossing my fingers. I hope he's one of us. And just wanted to say you're doing a great job, Daniel. I
Thank you.
know that induction is going to be in good hands.
I
Thank you for
appreciate
being
that.
here, and thank you for taking care of the three that we're going to honor them. Thank you.
I will tell you this story then, since we're on the subject. So, a number of years ago, before COVID, I went to our national office for a meeting, and the building's immense, and so I got lost, and so I started walking around because they have a north side, south side, and all that. So I started walking around, and I found the Hall of Honor, and it's a big, big, beautiful piece of art. I started looking at the names. I saw, the railroad Chinese workers. I saw Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and I sort of paused. I said, "Where are all the Pinoys? How come I don't see any Pinoy on that list?" And then fast forward about a year or two later, I called Auntie Luna. I said, "Auntie, we got to do something. Something's not right with, all the stories that I've been told growing up, and um, all the heartaches that our family and our Manongs and Manangs went through. Our story has to be told." And, Auntie Luna led the effort on behalf of FANHS and wrote the first nomination letter, and it took a little while to get there, but like I said, we're here. And that's the reason why we are here, is because it's an opportunity, but honestly, we're putting the Manongs, the three at least, in the history books, and they'll be there forever.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
can I add a little bit on what Danny has just said?
Oh, go ahead, Luna. Luna, not everybody knows where you're living, so explain
Yeah,
also where you
yeah,
live.
yeah. I'm here in Livingston, California, Central Valley, and I've been with Bonds uh, for many decades. But anyway, tagging on what Danny said, when he called and told me about the fact that there was an absence of Filipino representation in the Department of Labor Hall of Honor, we both agreed that, yeah, it's way overdue that our Manongs, and we felt that although we had Larry, Vera Cruz, and Pete Velasco in mind to uh, be recognized, they were representing all the Manongs that we've known. I mean, I know Danny and his family were very close and housed many Manongs through the years and took care of them as we did. And so they were like our family. And so for this recognition, if we didn't do anything about this recognition, we would have been really remiss in not honoring what they did for us, because we all stand on their shoulders. We know that had it not been for their struggles, had it not been for their resistance, that many of us would not have had the opportunities that we have today. So I really want to thank Danny for being there. I mean, he just happened to be there, and he sensed the need to have this done. And I thank all the chapters who followed suit after we put the word out that, hey, we've got a chance. Maybe it was going to be a long shot. We didn't know. But I mean, I think it took about 3 years, right, Danny? But, you know, bureaucracy as it is, that's what happens. But he kept it alive, and I want to thank Danny for doing that. And I won't be there at the induction on Wednesday, but we have a representation from our own Central Valley chapter. So I'll be there in spirit, but it was an honor to work on this project. And I want to thank Danny and all the other people that got behind this.
Thank you, Luna. Thank you. And Luna is a member of the only museum of FANHS in Stockton. And so we thank you for keeping that alive for all of us to have a museum for our history. Okay. All right. Well, again, great stuff coming out of all of you. I would like to now, thank you, Luna. I had you on the list to move you up, so you took it already. I'd like to have one of our prominent writers that has also is a Pinoy from Seattle to share his thoughts and his writings about this wonderful moment that's going to happen on Wednesday. Peter, you want to say a few words, please? Thank you.
Alan said he wanted me to read an excerpt, so I'll go ahead and do that. It's called Bad Attitude from my collection of mini memoirs, Uncle Rico's Encore. And I'll start out with his first line. If there was an American phrase beloved by my dad and his generation and passed along to their American-born sons, it's this: fuck you. I sit here remembering, knowing that the first generation has vanished and that the children have had children, perhaps grandchildren too. And that these stories, their stories, although they have much in common with the stories of other immigrants from Asia, Manong's attitude of defiance is unique. Such stories have not been told, or if told, have been forgotten or not listened to by too many younger Filipinos. But that indifference may be slowly changing. Young Filipinos have gone to Delano, visiting, writing about, and producing films focused on Larry Itliong and the pivotal Filipino role in the 1965 Delano grape strike. In terms of shining, defiant moments in Pinoy history, it's hard to top Itliong and the Delano Pinoys for what they did in 1965. But such a moment does exist in Seattle. It's all but forgotten details described in a lawsuit argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, ILWU Local 37 versus Boyd's, the 1954 case. Every spring, Local 37 sent thousands of Pinoys north to the Alaska salmon canneries. But the United States was in the middle of the communist hunting tsunami unleashed by Senator Joseph McCarthy, and Boyd, the Seattle-based District Director of Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS, was more than happy to do his part. His target, Local 37. In 1953, Boyd's office twisted federal immigration law and threatened, this is a quote, to treat aliens domiciled in the continental United States returning from temporary work in Alaska as if they were aliens entering the United States for the first time. By 1953, many of Local 37's members had become American citizens against whom Boyd's threats would not apply, but others were not. When the Philippines became independent in 1946, it cut the legal tie between America and its former colony. It also changed the status of thousands of Pinoys. Overnight, and despite decades in America, they lost their status and protection as American nationals. Aliens are what they became. And under U.S. law, aliens seeking entry to this country for the first time could be excluded for any number of reasons, including disfavored political affiliations. Chris Mansalvas, and I should note in this aside, Chris Mansalvas is the character Jose in Carlos Bolosan's America's in the Heart. He's basically the hero of the story. Chris Mansalvas, the local's president, was the unreachable itch that triggered Boyd's obsession. Among Filipinos, the one-legged Mansalvas was legendary, committed, courageous, and tough. And Pinoys, no stranger to hardship, admired these traits. But he was also an unabashed communist, unforgivable during the paranoia of the McCarthy era, when many Americans yearned for peace and for simple answers to the questions raised by an increasingly complex and hostile post-war world. In 1945, the US and its allies had defeated fascism. Yet just the next year, Winston Churchill warned of an iron curtain caused by the Soviet Union's aggressive westward expansion. Then in 1949, China, an important wartime ally, fell to communist forces in their country's civil war. And finally, in 1950, American soldiers were battling Chinese communists on the Korean Peninsula. The speed and sheer scope of the global changes were breathtaking and not at all to America's liking. Within this unsettling milieu, Senator Joe McCarthy provided the snake oil to soothe the nation's jangled nerves. Subversives, he claimed, were the problem, and he knew who they were. Communists and sympathizers could be found in government, universities, labor unions, and the arts. His charges, most of which were unfounded, were dutifully reported by a meek and uncritical American press. But in the early 1950s, the McCarthy era had shaped the tenor of American life, giving rise to blacklists, arrests, guilt by innuendo and association, terminations, and ruined lives. In those days, the INS building and Local 37's headquarters were within walking distance of each other. It must have galled Boyd and other immigration officials that a communist-led union could be so brazen as to openly operate and thrive in the agency's backyard. Hence the threat in 1953. INS's goal, I am sure, was to force the rank and file to remove Mensalvas, but he continued as president until 1959, or 5 years after McCarthy was censured by the Senate and 2 years after McCarthy's death in 1957. And each spring, and despite the threat, Local 37 would send Pinoys north for decades to come. But why were these workers, most of whom were not communists, so unfailingly loyal to a marked man? For starters, group solidarity, strengthened by years of racial hostility, had become an article of faith shared by members of the first Pinoy generation. This is how we survive. But that's not all. In 1984, I wrote this about Mensalvas. They stayed loyal to Chris because he understood them and their needs, and he spoke their language. That was his magic. He could speak to anyone, and that person would believe, or would at least want to believe. Chris's talent, that human touch, worked in spite of his ideology, not because of it. In retrospect, the rank and file's defiance was both brave and audacious during a time when other Americans drew their shades and cowered in their homes, and turncoats kept busy naming names. But not at Local 37, where union members made abundantly clear that they, not the federal government, would choose who they wanted to lead them. That's our decision. It's who we are, the old Pinoy said. And oh, one more thing, Mr. Boyd, Mr. Big Shot, Mr. Polished Florsheim Shoes. Fuck you. It's
Wow.
the truth. It's the truth. I knew Chris. I knew those guys. And they were pretty remarkable. I mean, there should be one more person added to the Labor Hall of Fame, and that's Chris Mensalvas. Jose, in Carlos
Yeah.
Brosan's America's in the Heart.
Very good, Peter.
Thanks.
Very good. Now, many of us may have been lucky to meet with Manong Larry, Manong Philip, and Manong Pete. I met the first two, but I never got a chance to meet Manong Pete. And people are interested to know who was Peter Velasco. And I got lucky yesterday because I bumped into my old friend, Emil de Guzman, who started the international hotel battle against eviction, as well as he's a writer. And I'm going to let him tell very briefly how he connected with Manong Pete. So, Emil from San Francisco, could you share a few thoughts of how that happened?
Well, let me briefly thank everybody for all the distinguished guests being on this this Zoom. It's quite remarkable to be able to hear just the remarkable stories of how we've all, really made history. Especially as a generation or two after the Manongs. Yeah, briefly, I was a professor at a university, and my focus was on ethnic studies and Asian American studies. Um, and when I began working with Larry and Philip and Pete, it was when I was at Berkeley and I was a student, and I just decided one summer to go down there and work, and I worked, and they really inspired me. I mean, I was hungry to know history. I wanted to know about the Manongs, and they just really shared with me, as well as the other Manongs there, so much of what they were about, and what their years of experience was, and and so it really led me back to Berkeley. I was in the strike, the strike, and then when the fire happened in 1969, where three of our Manongs died, I got involved. I became an organizer. I switched what I wanted to be an organizer, and I stuck with it all the way until the eviction, which happened 9 years later in 1977. Um, but Manong Pete was quite a remarkable guy. He was the first guy I met. I was in Sproul Steps, and he was just walking by, and he was heading up the boycott, the grape boycott, and he really was a leader. You could see that he had the command of many of the other Manongs, as well as the volunteers, and he was, he had that certain presence, that command of and attention, and he did move up. When I was in Delano, I could see that when he became the third vice president of the union after Larry had left, and as well as how after Manong Philip had left. But he was really very key. He was very loyal to Cesar, and he was just the kind of guy that you took very seriously. He was just wasn't, he wasn't gregarious like say Philip or Larry. He just was very, very serious constantly. So I remember him, and I remember how much of an influence he had. I made a poster of our Manongs, and when I go there, on Wednesday, I'll distribute my poster of it's called Agbayani Village. But anyway, he those memories I cherish, and I also am a writer. I wrote a newly released, published a book called Red Sky, Recollections of the International Hotel. I was the president of the International Tennis Association, and then I also became the Manila Town Heritage Foundation president emeritus to get the new building up, which was opened in 2005. So that's just my short story.
Thank you very much, Emil. That was very, very enlightening. I'm going to open up the floor because all of you, as Emil said, are all distinguished individuals in your own right and in the community that you serve. So I'll just go down the list of who I started with. Edwina. She'll tell you more that she's from Hawaii. Well, the first strike that I found, there are about 20 strikes from 1919 to 1965. And so, Edwina, would you please share? Because Alan talked about your father was one of the first who were.
Well,
Go ahead.
Eddie Lapa was my uncle, and he was a union leader. And my dad was totally opposite from my uncle because my father wanted to make money. So I'm on that side of the family, and my uncle, really fought hard to work with the everyday people. He said that his mission was to make sure that they have a better life. And I believe at the time when my uncle was president of ILWU in Hawaii, he did increase the largest amount of wage that he could for the union. And of course, Hawaii has changed because after that period, sugar has gone to other countries. And so it's more like a tourism industry now. But, I'm so glad that my husband Alan had put this together, because now I can remember stories about the Manongs, because as you know, we're in a different, Philippine American history is so diverse, but we hardly hear stories of the Manong. So thank you everyone for being on this forum. It's great to see Dolores Sabonga, because I remember Dolores is also the first Filipino American to graduate from law school at University of Washington, and I'm also an alum there. So I'm so glad to see her speak. And I went to school with her daughter. So thank you.
Thank you, Edwina, and thank you all the work that you do in Virginia Beach. I'd like to ask the chairperson of the National Federation of Philippine American Association, doing a lot of good things also in maintaining the identity of our history and so on. Mariella Fletcher, would you please share a few words?
Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you so much for putting this forum together. And we are also just so excited to be sharing time with you at the event. Unfortunately, I will not be there, but our President-elect Ryan Amato will be, of course, John Malagrito, Bing Brannigan, and some of the other NAFA members. But please know that we are so grateful for this collaboration, and also thinking of us, that we can all do the work together. It's not just us, it's not just you, but hey, you guys have done such a fantastic job for such a long time, and we are standing on your shoulders all the time. Just wanting you to know that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to bring up Daz, but I'm going to let Vita know that you'll be next after Daz. Daz Lamparas is union organizer and the former president of Asian Pacific American Labor Council. So Daz from San Francisco, could you share this important, significant impact of the labor movement with the three heroes?
Hello, everyone. I am so honored to be a part of this group, and thanks Emil and Ben for inviting me. I am a Filipino, as defined. I immigrated here in 1984. Anyway, the three heroes are my heroes as well. To be frank with you, I met Vera Cruz at the founding of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance in 1992 in Washington, D.C. I was one of the founding leaders of this organization, and it still exists today. And I very much salute when I talk to Phillips of what his experiences here, because he came from Cebu, and I'm a Cebuano, so we were talking sometimes in Visayan. And also, I am a follower of Larry Itliong, being an organizer myself. As a matter of fact, I helped organize the grape organizing in Delano in 2008, 2007, things like that. And I also met Imutan, Andy Imutan, who was part of that generation, but he was the youngest of that generation. I didn't meet Velasco. Anyway, I am so happy to hear the family members and descendants of those farm workers. But my uncle was also a United Farm Worker Labor, and he came here in 1921. He was also a farm workers. As a matter of fact, my cousin lives in Sacramento, and she told me about his father was associated with Larry Itliong. And listening to Alan's story, my uncle also went back to the Philippines at age 50 and married a 21-year-old Orokita lady from Misamis. And my cousin now is in late 50s, I believe. And so there was a wide difference. But there are so many memories that my cousin shared with me because we meet together when I was a labor leader in San Francisco, I was representing the a lot of Filipino workers in the healthcare, and one of the members called her house and asking for Das Lamparas, and she didn't know then who I was, because all he knew they were she knew is there's only Lamparas, they are the only Lamparas, but I came out into the blue, and so I been involved in the labor movement. I just retired a few years ago, and now I am so happy that Larry Itliong, Philip Vera Cruz, which it's my idol, uh, and Pete Velasco will be honored. And I wish I knew this honor, how do you call it? The Hall of
Hall of
Honor, because
Honors.
I could have put this on our resolutions when we had convention of APALA every 2 years, so that we can do this, what you guys are doing. And I'm really happy that you guys initiated this one. And thank you, Danny, for being there at the Department of Labor to honor our Manongs and our heroes. Thank you.
Thank you, Daz. Appreciate that. And I would like to have Vida Chan to share some comments, especially back with Manong Larry. Vida, are you there? Vida?
Am I on?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Okay. I'm not used to this. I've never done this before, but so where do I begin? I knew Larry from back when I was at San Francisco State, and my brother was Pat Saliver, who founded the Philippine American Collegiate Endeavor. We were students there, and what students do is they try to find excuses to get away from class, right? So one weekend, 4 of us, my brother, myself, and 2 other PACE leaders, decided to go camping, and we went down to Santa Cruz and camped out overnight under the stars. And the next day, we decided that we wanted to go to Delano and meet some of the old timers in person. And we drove on down there, and we went to the Philippine Community Center and asked if we could meet some of the old timers. And what they said to us was, you guys have to meet Larry. He's the one you want to meet. So just hang around. He should be here soon. So we sat out in front. The community hall was like way out. It was the only building in the area at that time. It was like in the middle of a grape field. And as we're sitting there, we see this dust building up like a tornado coming in the distance, and it was Larry in his truck. And it was like a grand entrance because he's just got a very charismatic personality. Not to mention also, not to deny the fact that we'd heard about him, we'd heard his reputation, and we were really excited to meet him. And when he came, we were introduced to him, and he shook our hands. And if any of you have ever met Larry, shaking his hand is a weird experience because Larry only had 3 fingers. He lost 2 fingers from working in the canneries up in Alaska. So it was just, it's a memory that stays with me. Anyway, he took us from the community center, and he took us to somebody's home where we got to pick vegetables, Filipino vegetables from their backyard. My first experience ever to do something like that. And that has also stayed with me. And from there, we went to his house where he then cooked us a Filipino dinner. Now, you guys got to get this. He didn't know us from the Blue Moon, but of course, we've heard of him. But he took us home and he fed us. And after dinner, the 4 of us are sitting there in a circle counting our money because now, as young kids would be, we decided that we wanted to go to Tijuana. So we're there and checking to see, do we have enough money? And Larry is walking around there in the circle on the floor, and he's looking over our shoulder, seeing what we're doing. And the next thing you know, he pulls out his wallet and gives each of us $10. $10. He gave these strange college kids, he gave each of us money to send us on our way so that we could make it down to Tijuana. And I was just bowled over, but we made it to Tijuana. We had a great time. And when I got home, I told my mother about this experience of meeting Larry Itliong and having dinner at his home, and then about him giving each of us money so that we could go down to Tijuana. And my mother looked at me and she said, "That's your uncle." I had never met him before, never heard his name mentioned before. And now I come back to her after meeting him in person for the first time, and she says, "That's your uncle by marriage." But ever since then, well, back up a little bit. The next time I saw him, I asked him if he knew my mother and if he knew my mother's cousin, which was his ex-wife. And he said, "Yeah, that's my ex-wife. I'm your uncle." He acknowledged it. And so I'm very, very proud to say that he's my uncle. And not just because of all that he's done for the Filipino farm workers, as well as the Mexican farm workers, but also because he's just a really wonderful man who's very, very warm, and he's got a huge heart. I mean, when he met us, he didn't know of our relationship. He didn't know that who my mother was. He only knew that he took in 4 college kids, strange kids, and he fed us, he housed us for one night, and then he sent us off on our merry way. And you know what? That's what being Filipino is all about, right? That we would open our homes up to each other, total strangers, because my stepdad was one of the old timers. He owned a barber shop and a restaurant, Filipino restaurant, and a pool hall down at the International Hotel. I don't know how long he had it because from what I understand, there were quite a few different owners. But he was the one, if any of you have ever been to the Manila, well, it's gone through several different names, but there was a restaurant in the International Hotel in San Francisco. And if you've ever been there when the restaurant was still thriving, there was a mural on the wall. The artist of that mural is the same artist that did the murals up at Point Tower in San Francisco. My stepdad was the one that hired that artist, but he hired that artist when the artist didn't have a reputation or a name yet. So he was able to get this artist when the guy was virtually unknown. So he didn't have to pay, through the teeth to pay for a famous artist. But that was a really beautiful mural. And unfortunately, nobody knew it and it got torn down. No one was able to save that painting. But so anyway, my stepdad, going back to my stepdad, he told me that back in those days, even if you saw a Filipino and he was a block down the street, you didn't know him, you would go out of your way to go to him and ask him if he's new in town, does he have a place to stay? Does he know anyone? And if he said no to any of those questions, he would take them home. And they all did this to each other. They would take them home, they would feed them, they'd house them, make sure that they're okay. And they all did that for each other. So what someone earlier said about how we stand there and we are there for each other, it's really true. And I've seen it over and over again through the years. And I want to honor each and every one of you for what you're doing to continue the work, to make sure that we have a voice, because that is something that's definitely needed. I just saw an article just the other day where they wrote about how the Mexicans don't have a voice in the United States. And yet they have the same history, very, very similar to the Filipinos, with the farm workers and the strikes and all. And they're only beginning to realize that they need to get together and start fighting for their voice. And they had a chance to do that with the farm workers. In fact, when Larry stepped back and had Cesar Chavez take over, there was a reason for it. Larry knew that he could do more doing his work in the background and let Cesar Chavez be out in the limelight. And then that was the opportunity for the Mexicans to really get their voice. And they started to, but they've got a few leap years to catch up with what Filipinos and Americans have done for themselves. So thank you, all of you.
Ben, can I say something? Vida, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that, because that's what, being with the Manongs, it gives me conviction as to why we have to come together as a community. And across the country, we have to keep that spirit, because that's the attitude that built community, whether you're on the West Coast and the East Coast. And for some reason, we forget, because when we first came to Virginia Beach, everyone helped each other, and the community they were able to come together and build their first center that's privately owned in Virginia Beach because of the values of the military. But it's the same process, the willing to help each other. And thank you for sharing. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you too, Vida. Thank you for coming in. I like to, there's 10 more friends on this Zoom. I'd like to have all of you have a chance to share some thoughts, but I just want to give a plug to Arnell, because he's our tech guy. Without him, we probably wouldn't have all of this all put
You
together.
already
So
left.
he left already?
Yeah, he has to
Okay.
work at 5 a.m.
All right. Well, he wants to thank all of you for being patient with the tech issues. I'll open the floor to others. If not, I will call out your name and give you a chance. I'll say this. One of my mentors was one of the first Filipino youth activities drill team Datu. And so I'd like to have John Ragudos, if you're still on, to say a few words. He's from Seattle, and of course, he was up there in Alaska himself. John, are you still here? Yeah, there you are, John. Are you taking a merienda or a siesta? I see.
But Auntie Dorothy. Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, all of you, Auntie Dorothy was on earlier, and she's probably listening in on through her phone. She couldn't get on her laptop. John, you're not there? Okay. Well, how about Thaddeus? Mr. Thaddeus Gamori, are you still here? Thaddeus? Okay. And so how about Fel? Fel, you still on the call? If you're in the East Coast, I can understand why you want to drop off, because it's already what, almost midnight?
10:30.
How about EE Mina? EE, are you still on? Or can you hear me? No? Okay. How about Michael Reyes? I think you're on this side, Michael. Okay. Vicky, you got to be on. Vicky Greco, are you still here?
I am on. I am
All right.
here.
Come on up. Come on, Vicky. Bring
Well,
it on.
I am so happy to hear about the Manongs and their role in the labor movement on the West Coast. Here in Virginia, we're a right to work state, which means we're not, they're anti-union. But I have many friends in the labor movement here. My friend Thomas Calhoun, he's a friend of the Filipinos. He actually is the president of the Southeast Labor, I forget the association, but he's always happy for me to share any of our events that we're doing in FANHS. He had only great words to say about a Buffalo Soldier event that we had covered years ago. I can't even remember what year it was, but I try to stay in touch with our labor workers, because they are the ones who really are doing the work on the front lines to organize. Our Norfolk Federation of Teachers union isn't really a union, it's an association. And Tom was a longtime president there. Unfortunately, he's retired, but he's moved on to a bigger organization. And I just kind of worry about the leadership transitions that we see when things kind of, where we lose momentum and we don't bring others along. And I am always hopeful that we are bringing so many others along with us beyond our Filipino American community to understand the history, the role of that we play in American history. And I'm convinced that, FANHS HR is trying our very best to make sure that that folks embrace the roles that our community just forges, whether we're supported or not. We're really, I think Edwina can, and you can jump in, Edwina, but we just shared a great partnership with the Lions Club here, the Filipino American Lions Club, to bring Nurse Unseen, the documentary, to Norfolk's MacArthur Memorial Museum this past Saturday. We had a great panel community discussion, and Alan jumped in when things kind of turned upside down. We had technical difficulties. We had to just redo the whole thing. But I'm sharing all this just to say that we are out here trying to make sure that folks understand our history, that they take part in the history making. We're really pushing to get representation at the local council, school board, and General Assembly level. That's one of my missions. I'm never going to run for office, but I want so many of our younger people to understand the power that they have in their voices and their actions. So I'm going to stop there because that's all I can say, but I'm just so happy that these three men are being honored. It's a long time coming, but like the Nurse Unseen documentary, unsung no more. We have too many heroes, too many history makers that are almost, invisible to others, but they're not invisible to us. And we just have to keep their legacies alive. And I mean, men and women. I'm so happy to see all the aunties on this call, and I hope to learn more as I continue along my path of just, sharing in FANHS' legacy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you.
Just to let you know, we're Vicky's from Virginia, so are we. So a different perspective from that part of the country, but we still appreciate and see the connection with the Manongs and the nurses, that we're all there to support each other. And that's how the nurses, that movie was excellent. Nurses Unseen, how they had to support each other and what they did to sacrifice their lives to save patients. So just thought I'd add that in. Thanks, Vicky.
Great, thank you, Edwina. The youngest person on this call is Raymond Garcia. Raymond, are you still on? Raymond? Okay. And I think last but not least, if John is still there, he's welcome to jump on. If not, Lorna Dietz, one of our journalists, to maybe share some thoughts. Lorna, are you still there? Maybe not. Okay. We have 10 minutes left before we close for the evening. And any last minute thoughts? I'm going to maybe, Danny, you have any housekeeping for Wednesday? What can we expect? Is the president gonna make an appearance, or the vice president, or anyone else? Can we hear what's gonna
Rob Bonta will
ahead.
be on video, but no president or vice president. Julie Sue, the acting secretary, she'll be there. Let's see. We will also have a few speakers. Herb Delute from the Delano chapter of FANHS will be speaking on behalf of FANHS. Gail Romasanta, who's the writing director of Larry the Musical. She'll also say a few words, and actually she has some of her cast they'll perform.
Wow.
Who else? And then the families of the three will be able to say a few words for the induction. After the event, there's actually a merienda that's being sponsored by a community group. and that's going to go from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and so it's like an after party from the Hall of Honor. So that should be a lot of fun, and I think the cast will also sing maybe one or two songs, and then Emil will have his book available, and he'll also do a reading, sort of like an open mic. So should be a really good event.
Is your sister going to be there?
She was trying to, but she has a lot going on. Our uncle just passed away last Friday, so she's helping
Oh,
to
yeah.
put together, his funeral arrangements. Auntie Luna, Uncle Danny passed away.
Oh,
Yeah,
our
so
condolence, Danny.
thank
Ben,
you.
before we go, we have to hear from someone
Who?
who's here visiting from the Philippines. That's Joni, descendant of the Manong. Can she say something, Joni?
This is Joan Cordova,
Yes,
former trustee and officer of FANHS
president too.
and president, as well as a local girl from Stockton. Go ahead, Joni. Or we call her Rabbit. Go ahead, Rabbit. No?
She's not there?
No connection?
Oh, darn
Okay.
it.
We'll catch her another time. Well, Alan, I'm going to throw it back to you, but let me just say this. When I started with the Farm Workers Union, it was because of my Chicano friends who said you need to get involved with the strike. People that started the great strike with Cesar Chavez. And I said, really? So they got me involved, and once they said that the strikers in Delano needed food. So I was a I was a student administrator. I commandeered two large school buses, and I told the administrators at my college, we're going to go do a field trip in Salinas, and there was five of us, and we loaded up the two buses of food, and we drove all the way down. My first time to go to Delano, and it was my first time to meet with Larry. Larry thanked us all for bringing all this food that was needed. But I had the pleasure of hearing uh, Manong Philip. If you ever heard Manong Philip, it was my first time. I think I got PTSD from his speech, uh, where I grew up, swearing was not allowed in the house. So it was an exciting moment to hear someone use vulgarity as part of the strike movement. So I want to thank all of you for making this special. I do want to say this, Alan. Although we're celebrating Manongs, put this in the history book that when the strike hit in Delano and the Filipinos, 1,500 of them, walked off, the forewoman of the grape pickers was a Filipina, and her name was Baltazar. Remember that, okay, Danny? Because we need to get some gender balance, if you don't mind me saying it. I have a group of women moving a movement saying, "Where are the Manangs?" And there were Manangs during the 1965 Great Strike. I've been interviewing them, and also children as well in the strike. So I'm looking forward to adding the celebration of our Manangs with there. Alan, the floor is back to you.
Well, it's been a very, very enlightening evening, and you can just feel the camaraderie, the energy generated from from the Manongs and Manangs. And although they're gone, we do carry on what they stand for. And I believe that we have a lot of work to do, but it can be done. Because after all, we're descendants of these crazy guys, you know, that's in our blood, man. So I'm glad Daniel is out there in DC, man, because like I said, because I just want to in a positive thing. We've got work to do, and I look forward to working with all you guys because hey, we got to make it happen. If not us, who? Thank you. So I'm gonna end it that way. And so anybody else want to say something? Because I'm just gonna shut it down. Or it was great. Great being here.
Well,
Thank you.
I know Luna wants to say something because I know Luna wants to say something because we've been friends for God knows almost